Welcome to another episode of Purchase to Profits. I'm Seth Ferguson. Our guest today is a former aerospace engineer and is now a real estate investor, lifestyle entrepreneur, and business consultant. After leaving her 9-to-5 job to start her own real estate company, she managed to facilitate over $18 million in real estate transactions in its first 5 years of business. She's written over 190 articles for Bigger Pockets, and her work has been featured on both Fox Business and The Motley Fool. Her focus is mostly on rental properties and is a true believer in lifestyle design via passive income. When she's not dealing with properties, she's likely to be found snowboarding, traveling, or volunteering in California prisons. Ali Boone is the founder of Hipster Investments. Ali, welcome to Purchase to Profits. It's great to have you on the show.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be here. I think this will be a fun one.
Yeah, I think it's going to be fun. I can tell already. So to start the fun off, do you want to tell us about your real estate goals? What are you aiming for?
Well, so right now, I'm actually in pause from buying. A little bit of what I'm working with now is, the real estate market, in my opinion, is changing a little bit. Mm-hmm. And it's changing in a way that I'm not real sure. I haven't been through this version of the cycle yet, because when I started into real estate, we were at peak, and this is US. I don't know where Canada was on this, but we were at the peak, and then we just to crash. I mean, there was like no time in between. It was like overnight. And so in my business and investing in general, you've kind of got the optimal times to buy. Like, I don't recommend buying in peak times, but a lot of people are comfortable doing that. And in a crash, everything's on sale. Well, now what I'm finding in a lot of markets is that it seems like we've kind of capped a little bit, and we seem to be turning down. And that's cool, except it's not as fast as a crash. So it's like, if I buy a property right now, is it going to be less value tomorrow? So it's kind of it's a new territory, at least for me, because I've only been doing this for 7 or 8 years. So I haven't been through this version of the cycle. So on my business side, I'm navigating that a little bit. On my personal side, it was convenient. I was pausing buying right now anyways. My most recent was a duplex in Venice Beach, local to where I was, or local to where I live now. And so we got that last March, and it's my first time ever being an actual landlord, because I've always outsourced. I've always used property management. I have screamed from the rooftops about how bad landlording is, and now I have confirmation that I was correct the whole time. So a lot of it is, and I've kind of done that in my career, is like I've bought a chunk of things or bought something or whatever, and then kind of navigated it for a little while, and then buy something else. And so I'm a slow and steady wins the race type. So I'm just kind of playing with what I have now and just kind of really feeling out what the market's going to do, because I don't really know. Gotcha.
So it's actually interesting that you mentioned that, because I'm in Toronto, Canada right now. And in the spring of 2017, we had the peak of our market here. Now, obviously, there's all sorts of submarkets, but generally speaking, we had a 20% drop in values. And it's interesting, just because you have a big shift. There's some people who bought at the peak who didn't do good underwriting, so they're in a bad spot. Yep. Are you doing anything with your current portfolio? I know you said you're holding off on buying to maybe solidify your equity position to ride out a slump, if you think that's kind of where it's going. Are you doing any changes?
Not really. So this duplex that we got, me and a couple partners got last year, was very different than anything I've ever preached about before. So it was different in the sense of it's negative cash flow. We bought at a peak. I'm a landlord. Like, you name it, if I've preached against it, this duplex goes against that. Yeah. But so that one, part of the motivation for that one is it is in Los Angeles and it is in Venice Beach, and values really, like, even though it seems that we're hitting peak everywhere, the LA values aren't going down right now.
Yeah.
So that one's a little bit different, but most of the properties before that, I bought much more strategically. Like, I bought in Atlanta when it was in its epic crash, right before it was about to boom. So all of my properties there literally doubled or tripled in value. And so and I think it's really it's an important note about where you buy, because and as far as I understand, the Southeast may not be hitting the same spot in the market. I have a real estate agent friend in Chattanooga. Like, the Southeast is still booming because prices are still cheap. But I've always been conscientious about where I buy, for the reason of a downturn. Atlanta has been growing so big, so fast, that even in a downturn, it's still going to be better off than when I bought initially. So from the equity standpoint, all that, I'm actually really not in danger of that on any of the properties. But I attest that well, knock on wood, anything can happen, or knock on my computer. But it's a good note, because I think when you buy a property, because people who buy specific for appreciation speculation, now would be a time to be concerned. Like, ask the speculators how they felt in 2009 when everything bottomed out.
Yeah.
So, like this Venice duplex, I keep pointing to it. It's that way. I was thinking of things like that ahead of time. I know I was going into a negative cash flow situation. I knew we were buying when prices are higher versus lower. What are my mitigations for that? Like, what am I really looking at? And I think on any property, you have to ask yourself the question, if things were to crash, where am I going to be? Because it's a realistic thing. And so that some of that is going to be based on your financing. Do you have a fixed rate loan versus adjustable? Are you in a growing market? If like Detroit, for example, when Detroit was booming and then Detroit disappeared, you don't have renters anymore. Like, are you in a market that has enough industry, enough whatever, to keep renters in, and this is rental properties, keep renters available for your property? Like, where the decline's going to happen. If it's just a crash and it's just the value of your property, assuming you have a fixed rate loan, you really don't have to worry much about it. It's more at that point if the rents disappear or the tenants disappear or, something. So I think a crash can take anybody out, but I think if you put enough thought into it ahead of time when you purchase and you have your exit strategies for that, there's a lot of risk mitigation that can be done.
For sure. And I think you bring up a good point. Basically, to summarize, like, the key market drivers are really what's governing that decision, right? Because like you're looking for that job growth, population growth. And as long as that stuff is pretty solid, any sort of drop in values is just going to rebound at some point.
Yeah.
Right? And it's interesting talking with people from, let's say, your secondary or tertiary markets versus like somebody in Seattle or New York or Toronto or Vancouver, because your whole mindset has to shift. Because it's in those big markets, it's impossible to buy a cash flow positive property. They just don't exist, right?
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing. It's like, because people are like, oh, well, I should buy in my backyard. I'm like, okay, well, your backyard though, like they would rather buy in their backyard with negative cash flow than outside of their backyard for cash flow. And if you do that, that's cool. Like, I actually wrote an article one time about after I bought this Venice duplex, is because it doesn't check any of my boxes. And it's like, but with this, Venice Beach of all things, LA in general is not going down anytime soon. The west side of LA is not going down anytime soon. Dear God, Venice Beach is not. And Venice Beach is section between Santa Monica and Marina del Rey, Playa Vista, whatever. And both Santa Monica and those other ones, I mean, they've got high rises going in. They're getting overpopulated. They've all been brought up, and not Venice Beach, which we're actually hoping they don't, because Venice Beach has a very certain character that we're really hoping Google doesn't destroy. But everything around it has been going up. And so it turned out where when I was paranoid about paying a high price for this property, we closed on it, I think, in March, and it's already, give or take whatever estimates, however reliable those are, but it's already appreciated like $700,000-800,000. And it's like, well, and that's in a downed market in LA. So in this duplex, like, it can take short-term rentals, it can take long-term rentals. I'm probably going to live in it at some point. So there was a lot of components that, for me, made up for the negative cash flow and the peak prices. And so, but that's what people don't look at is if you're just in Seattle and there's no cash flow and you just grab a property thinking, oh, well, if I own a property, it's going to be profitable. Well, maybe, but you need to think about if there's no cash flow, where's your profit going to come from? And if you're just assuming appreciation, number one, you need to plan for appreciation not to happen, just in case it doesn't happen. And number two, really work the numbers. I'm getting off on a tangent now, but really work the numbers, because if you finance the property, people don't like, let's say you buy $100,000 property and it appreciates to 200,000. You're like, yay, 100,000 in profit. Well, no, because first of all, mortgage interest, you've got to tie that into the bottom line, and then all your expenses, repairs, whatever. So plan for the appreciation not to happen and figure out what appreciation you would actually need to get realistically to profit. And it gets a little easier with rental properties versus your own property. But, so I think it goes back to my original point is it requires the thinking before you sign the contract. Like, know your options, know the possibilities, and how are you going to mitigate those should things not quite work out.
Yeah, for sure. So going back in time, like when you were first starting, you started building your portfolio outside of where you were living. You were going to other markets. Is that true?
Well, so funny story on that. Before I just went outside of my market, my very first intentional investment was out of the country.
Oh, whereabouts?
And not even Canada or Mexico. It was in Nicaragua.
Oh, okay.
In Central America. So, I'm one of those like go big or go home. If I'm going to invest outside of my area, we're going all the way. So my investing started out of the country. Those all failed. Shocker. And then when I reeled it back in, I was back in the U.S., but I was at that time in Atlanta. So it was about 2,200 miles from where I was. And I grew up in Atlanta, so I was very fortunate as a new investor to have the familiarity with the good market. The best market at that time happened to be one that I know a lot about. A lot of people don't have that. But yeah, so until this duplex, actually, I've never invested locally to me. It's always been I'm an out of sight, out of mind type. Like, I don't want to drive by the property and see a scuff on the garage and get all anal about it. And, so yeah.
Yeah. So when you were in that build phase of your portfolio, did you say, I want to own so many properties by this time? Or did you say, I wanted to own let's say 5 million of real estate? Like, how did you set benchmarks?
No, I've never had anyone ask that question. I'm like, oh, that's a good one, actually. I was more of a one foot in front of another type. And I think part of that may have been that I wasn't actually planning to become a real estate investor. It wasn't like I had my corporate job. I was an engineer and I just wanted out of corporate. That's all I knew. I was not tied to whether it be real estate or whatever it was going to be. And in the time that it took for me to kind of explore options for how to do that, real estate kind of reared its head a little bit. But at the time when I started, I legitimately was starting just as like something smart to do with my money while I was trying to figure out my way out of corporate. Yeah. And so because I think it was just kind of a side thing of where to put my money, it was really just kind of one property, another property. Oh, I could grab this property. I actually don't think I've ever had a long term of like, how much do I want to have? And a lot of, in all fairness too, my career now is half real estate and half entrepreneurship, because I have a real estate investing company, but it's not just my properties that fund my life. Like, I have the business and I have the properties. Whereas a lot of people want it all to be real estate or whatever. So I totally appreciate having goals, because I think when you have the goals, you can kind of work backwards. I'm like, okay, what's that going to take? And, the best example, we were talking about the appreciation. I hear people saying, oh, well, my goal is to have $10,000 in passive income per month. And yet they're looking at negative cash flow properties. And I'm like, so there seems to be, interesting. There's a, You can profit off the negative cash flow, or you can get the appreciation, whatever. But if your goal is a certain amount of passive income per month, aren't you going to need cash flow per month? Fancy. So with that idea, if you determine your goals, you can work backwards, try and figure that out. But yeah, I was always a one step ahead of another. And like this duplex last year, not planned at all. Very few of them were planned, and I would attribute more of my purchases to a slight addiction. Like once you buy your first property, you're like, uh-oh, I want more, especially in a crash when everything's on sale. It's like grabbing off the clearance rack, and I'm like, I want that one, and I want that one. So there's a slight addiction problem in there too.
Hey, if there's one thing to be addicted to, real estate is probably the healthiest thing.
It's true. I had a friend earlier today telling me her addiction to coffee, and I was like, hey, it's not heroin. And she's like, I feel like there's like middle ground between those two things. And so, you know, and real estate's even better than coffee, I think, as long as you know what you're buying. Because then if you get addicted and you're just buying everything, you might be in trouble.
For sure.
But it's still not heroin. Don't do drugs, kids.
Life lessons with Ali. Here we go. So is there one deal that stands out that's like really a keystone deal or something that's really jumped you forward?
You know, without even the emotion behind it, the one that really propelled me was the failed Nicaragua deal because...
Okay, I want to learn about this deal because it sounds really interesting. One that
went for splat. So when I was in my corporate job, I was, like I said, trying to figure out my way out of my corporate job. And I was so bored at my job. I was getting emails from I had subscribed to everything. And I saw a webinar I had just tooled around Orange County, California, looking for rental properties, just out of curiosity. They were all expensive. They all had like dead rats in them. They're gross, like no cash flow. Not that I knew what it was at that time. Yeah. But so I'm sitting at my desk and this webinar shows up and it's like, buy beachfront bungalows starting at $99,000. I was like, well, that seems really affordable. And I love the beach. So tell me more. And so I watched this webinar and I was so bad at geography. I actually thought Nicaragua was in Africa. So I actually had to Google map it, figure out that it was in Central America. And I was like, huh. Yeah. And I love, if anything can rattle somebody, like I was just going to get off on like people being like, I'm sorry, you're buying where? So this was kind of a rebellious move also. But I watched this webinar and it actually sounded really legit. And long story short, it was legit. There were some huge players in this. This was a development. It was pre-construction going in Nicaragua at the time. They have a little problems now, but at the time, huge investor paradise. And there was a big hotel chain in on this. There was a big name golf designer in it. Like this was this was not, just the idiots who got kind of taken by it. Not taken, but so I pursued it. And as soon as I got this first bungalow, then I got a home site. And like I went to Nicaragua probably 5 times in a year and a half. Like I was all over this. I loved for me, it was really cool because I got to be around people. I'd been hanging around engineers, God bless them, but they don't talk as much as I like to talk. And so I was kind of starting to find my people. I was making great connections. I was having so much fun doing it. And it was properties. We got to wander the development, all this kind of stuff. And it kind of the famous story of developers is the money somehow just kind of disappeared. And we're all like, oh, but, but you didn't build anything. Where'd the money go? And it ended up in a whole slew of drama. But it was a very pivotal thing for me, number one, because I lost a significant amount of money as my first deal. And, more than one time after that, I was like, why would I stick in this industry? Like, that was a real kind of bend me over, like, oh, welcome to real estate. Like, oh, interesting. But not to sound nerdy, but I persevered, and I met the right people. All of the people that I met there have been pivotal people in my career now. I still work with a lot of them. And so logistics, it worked because that's where I met the people that I work with now. It's how it launched everything else. But also from a mindset perspective is like, part of real estate, I swear, you're just going to fail at some point. Like truly something's going to go wrong the more you do in it. And so if my first oopsie was the first one and that's all the money I ever lose, which maybe it is, maybe it's not, but to prove that mindset to myself that early on has really given me a bit of stability through the rest of it, because things haven't gone perfect the whole time at all. I have a turnover right now going on that is just, it's like every day I'm getting a bill for something, and I'm like, at some point, how much are we putting into this property? But because I had the big one up front, it really did kind of give me that stability for later. So and it sounds cool. Like so many people, their feathers were totally ruffled when I'm like, oh, I'm buying a pre-construction bungalow in Nicaragua. And they're like, are you? I'm like, uh-huh. So, and even just like judging myself about that, I was like, wait, did I miss something along the way? Did I get taken? Am I an idiot? That whole failure mindset. But I was like, wait, no. Like this big hotel chain was in the same position. People put millions of their own dollars in this, so it's just overall, it set the stage for everything. And today I've never gotten that money back. We're waiting on the key year to write it off on the taxes finally. But, and the guy swears he's going to keep building. I'm like, sure. But yeah, I'd say even from the mindset perspective, it changed a lot very quickly.
For sure. And I like the more people I talk to, the more their first deal is never their best deal, right? It's more like a learning experience.
Yeah.
And I think you had the unfortunate combination of development
Yep.
in a country outside the US or Canada,
Yep.
which has some other unique situations.
Well, and since then I've heard a lot of stories about people buying into developments in the US and the problems that can happen there. And then you add it into another country, and the US only has so much control. The US, we're at least pretty supportive of each other, where if you need to go for a lawsuit or whatever, like the FBI, for example, they're going to be concerned if a developer tanks out on everybody. But in Nicaragua, the US, they care, but they don't really have a lot of jurisdiction either. So yeah, it's a huge layers of learning, and bottoms up.
Yeah. And I think as this cycle kind of winds down, whenever that is, because we don't have a crystal ball, I think there'll be some interesting opportunities on the development side, as developers kind of run out of that money and investors are able to come in and relieve them of their assets. So
yeah, and I haven't really done anything on the development side since then. And so if I were to get back into that arena, I would have to learn a lot of stuff, because it's like, okay, I know what happened in my case, but what are other things that can happen? What do we have to look for? But I even remember during the crash, when I was back to the US and looking at rental properties, there were all those subdivisions that had started and that just stopped because in the crash, the developers left. And one of my properties that I can think of right off the bat was in one of those. Like the pool had been built, everything was going. It was like half a subdivision now. And a couple of years ago, I got my first HOA bill. And I was thinking, HOA for what? There's not even a subdivision. Like the pool was vandalized, everything. Yeah. And apparently they fixed it all back up. So it's interesting to watch exactly what you're talking about, the cycle. You've got your market cycles, but then the development cycle. And most of what I work with now are turnkey rental properties, which are, I was about to say used properties. We're not talking about cars here. Pre-owned, older properties, not new construction.
Yeah.
And we quite a few times, it's like, do we need to start getting into new construction? So it's just, it's such a fluid market environment, whatever. But if you are willing to take any failures that come, like you say, the first deal is likely not going to be your best, but there's a reason for that, because you learn more from doing deals than you do ahead of time. And being willing to follow what's going on and adjust accordingly, then you're setting yourself up to be in a great spot.
Yeah, that's a good point, because there's, depending on where you're at in that real estate cycle, there's going to be different strategies that are probably a little more profitable depending on where you're at. Yeah. So recognizing that and figuring out the best game plan is certainly a good way.
For example, if you're flipping, I mean, I have never flipped, but my assumption is flipping, you definitely don't want to buy at peak market, because then what are you going to flip it for? And I'm used to rental properties. Those are my forte. But yeah, you've just got to learn enough to be able to know what those factors are, and to know, that just, I swear, if people just knew a little bit about what they were doing ahead of time, it can alleviate so many problems. And I get it. It's hard to learn. We didn't learn it in school. Who do you listen to, whatever, but just taking a little bit of time to figure out those things ahead of time, you can set yourself up to be in a great spot.
For sure. So like, how has real estate set you up so far to be in a great spot? You know?
Oh, well, since I'm secretly in half pajamas right now and
No,
not,
we couldn't tell. You had us fooled.
I had to grab a hoodie real fast. If I
Yeah.
stood up, all secrets would be blown. I have my slipper socks, my sweatpants. Um, so like I said, mine is half properties, half having a company. And I like to be clear on that because people are like, wait, how much did you buy so many properties that you can fund your life? I'm not funding my life just by properties. I left corporate sooner. You can do that, but I was too antsy in my corporate job and I just needed out. So between my properties and my company, the big thing that's changed for me is I can do what I want in life. Like I was telling you before we got on the call, I was so behind because we had the holidays, and then a friend and I decided to leave for a week last week and just go. Like I can work anywhere, and the big thing for me with properties, with my company, is passive income. And so when you get into real estate, it's a big thing to understand because if you're going to go actively flip houses, that's cool as long as you know the workload that's going to come with that. Like my thing with the landlording and the duplex, one of my greatest joys in life is sleeping in. I really just enjoy it. I like to wake up when my body wants to wake up. And the minute we got this duplex, and this duplex was rent ready from the get-go, but we needed to do small things like, rodents and termites, and just, I had to meet contractors over there. I can't tell you how many times I had to wake up early to go over there. And, it sounds not that big a deal, but it took away from my joy of sleeping in. And so I'm the kind of person, I'm on the far end of the spectrum. I want to do things when I want to do them. I don't want to have to be anywhere. I don't want to have to go meet people places. I don't want to do work. I don't want to do any of that. So if I were to become an active flipper, that would be a problem. Like I don't like that stuff. And so for me, because I focus on the passive income, I've been able to focus on the things I really like to do in life. I like to travel when I want to travel, and now I can just take my laptop and work, although I didn't actually work very well last week, but I have the option to work when I go. I can sleep usually till whenever I want to. I think my bio, so I volunteer in prisons all the time. Like I'm in prison every Sunday with an 8-hour road trip with it. I do weekend workshops, and I wouldn't be able to do that. I would say easily 75% of my life, the way I have it now, I would not be able to do if I was working 9 to 5. I used to do that. I used to have to ask permission for vacations. If someone said, you want to go to lunch? I'm like, I can't really, and so real estate was really the catalyst for me to realize that there's so much more to what our lives can be involved with. Now, like I live in Venice Beach. Before, I couldn't live in Venice Beach because it was so far from my job. The minute I quit that and was going to work from home, I moved. I live where I want to. I'm thinking about where a friend and I traveled last week. I'm thinking about moving there for a year just because I can do something different. So, people get into real estate for so many different reasons. So many people just want to do something smart with their money. That's cool. For me personally, it was really the catalyst to say, hey, you can have a completely different life and a life in the way that you want it, not dictated by 9 to 5. So
yeah, that's huge.
I like it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's huge. And it's interesting because I've noticed if I'm, let's say I'm talking with somebody who owns, like $700 million in real estate, time is the most valuable asset they have. It's never about the money. It's all about the time freedom. Yeah.
Well, so my first book is with the publisher as we speak. So I'm super pumped.
Awesome.
Yeah. It's tentatively I'm not even gonna say what it's gonna be called, but it's a mindset book about real estate investing. I kind of think of it like the prerequisite before you ever learn about a real estate investing strategy. And some of it's what we've talked about, like understanding passive versus active income, working versus investing, like really clarifying for yourself who, your strengths, what it is you really want, yada, yada, yada. But in that, I have a section in there called the three currencies. I am convinced, you just said this, I am 100% convinced that money is not the only currency that we use. A currency is something you trade to get something else. And I think there's three currencies in this primary currencies that I use every day: money, which we all know, time, which you just mentioned, and sanity. And I think, and for me, I would rather, it's cheaper for me to pay more money to keep my time and sanity. And I kind of have this chapter in this book of like, when you're pursuing things, think of it in terms of those three things. Like, I buy turnkey rental properties. They're more expensive than buying a distressed property that I have to fix up. And there's a lot of people who argue that's a dumb deal. And I get it. But for me, my time and sanity are worth so much more than money. So I would rather pay more for a deal if it means I get to keep my time and sanity. Over here, I have what I like to call the world's most expensive bookshelves. I got totally taken by a contractor. These are like wooden shelves. There's nothing fancy about them. But I lost a lot of sanity over these stupid bookshelves in order to save money. And so I look at all these things in my life, and if I'm going to make a decision, which of those three currencies am I about to pay with? And usually, for the most part, it's cheaper for me to pay money for something than time and sanity, give or take. Like, now I'm landlording, and this further, that's what I'm doing is I pay more with my time to landlord than I do sanity or money. But in some cases, like, I inherited a tenant with it. I lost more sanity over her, like, to just ask, like, she needed to be committed, I think. But like, I was about to have to be committed. Like, and so I was spending all of my sanity on her. And so it's like, at one time, what am I paying with? And yeah, so exactly your point is, maybe you get to 700 million in assets, but do you still have your time and sanity intact? Like, and I remember as a kid, I was like 13. I was like, I want to be a gajillionaire. Like, I just wanted to figure out how to make it happen. It seemed like a fun task. It wasn't for pretension. It wasn't for anything. But it's like, I just want to figure out how to make this happen. And over the course of my life, all of my priorities have changed. I'm not a gajillionaire. And if I get there, cool. But right now I have time and sanity. And that to me is worth so much more. So, it's part of real estate is, I think that's one thing that gets people kind of discombobulated is they think they need to do a particular kind of deal. And maybe that is a good kind of deal, but maybe something for themselves was more important, and it goes against that, so it's great things to look at. So that's a lot of, not to push my book all of a sudden, but that's a lot of kind of what my book talks about is exactly what you mentioned is what's more important in the long run. Is it the numbers, or as I say it, is it your time or sanity? So, and the answer will be different for everybody.
Yeah. And you're also, you're making decisions based on the end result you want to accomplish. You don't have it flipped around the other way. So, like, let's say you want to, make sure you have your time available to do what you want to do. You're going to make those decisions along that path to make that happen rather than, mess it all up. So where can people find out more about you and order a copy of your book once it comes out?
I have no idea where the book will be available.
Okay, all right.
I do not know. So the easiest thing to do, you can always email me directly, Ali, A-L-I, at hipsterinvestments.com. I love meeting people. Even if you just say hi, tell me you found me on this podcast, I'll give a shout out. So reach out anytime directly. You can always go to hipsterinvestments.com and subscribe there. And I guarantee if you're subscribed there, you'll get the notice when the book is out, wherever. I'm assuming it'll be on Amazon, but, we send, I think, one email a week. We do some webinars. But with that, know that you're not getting access to our full inventory of properties because we work with a lot of these properties, so we can give you that. So email me or reach out on the website and you'll get that then. You don't get it just from subscribing, but yeah, reach out on the website. If you reach out on the contact form, you'll probably hear back from Melissa. but she can always copy me on things or email me directly. And so super cool. I just got my first Facebook page like a month ago. I've never had Facebook. I started getting accused of not existing. So I conformed, and my Facebook, I don't really know how Facebook works yet. I have a page and a profile, whatever that means. My page is Ali Boone, Boone lifestyle. My profile, I don't know the difference in all of them, is you can find me on Twitter, Instagram, all those, aliboone.com with the DOT spelled out. So if you find me in one spot, you can find me anywhere. But like I said, reach out. I love meeting people.
No, that's great. Ali, just want to say thanks so much for taking the time to do this. I really appreciate it.
You bet. Well, thanks for having me.
You are very welcome. And to you, our viewers, I wish you well in your journey from purchase to profits. See you next time.